Trump administration has moved to cancel temporary asylum protections for some 4,000 Myanmar nationals in the U.S., terminating the temporary protected status designation granted to them since 2021. The Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, announced this decision, saying a review of current conditions in Myanmar no longer justified its status. And she cited the planned elections and the end to Myanmar's state of emergency as evidence of an improving situation. The order is expected to come into effect in 60 days.
We plan to follow the process that's in law to evaluate TPS and how it applies to different countries and individuals from them. It was never meant to be an asylum program. It was always meant to be put in place after an incident or an event on a temporary basis.
Mr. Trump has ordered a broad review of all refugees who entered the U.S. under his predecessor, Joe Biden, according to an internal U.S. government memo reported by Reuters. The memo was reportedly signed by Citizenship and Immigration Services Director Joe Edlow, and it orders a halt to all processing of applications for permanent residence for refugees who entered under Mr. Biden's watch. And the agency says it'll terminate the refugee status of people already in the U.S. if they're found to not meet the criteria for refugees. The move would impact more than 230,000 refugees who entered the country between January 2021 and February this year. Well, to help us understand this better, here's Muzaffar Chishti, who's Senior Fellow at the Migration Policy Institute in New York. Thanks for talking with us, Mr. Chishti. So we've laid out the facts and the justification for the revocation of TPS for Myanmar nationals. What's your take on it? Is it purely administrative, or is there a political element to it?
Well, the Trump administration doesn't like temporary protected status. They tried to end temporary protected status for all countries in the first administration. So this is not surprising. There are about 17 countries today which have been designated for temporary protected status, and about 9 of them have already lost it or are about to lose. So it's not particularly driven, in my opinion, towards Myanmar. It's more consistent with the Trump administration's policies that, in general, temporary protected status policies are not in the interest of the United States.
Well, then what kind of criteria does the Trump administration use to decide when to grant or when to revoke TPS?
So temporary protected status is in our law since 1990, which allows the government to give protection to people, which means we don't return nationals of a designated country if we believe they would be harmed in their country. And that's because there will be a civil war, there will be a political violence, or there's a climatic conditions or natural disaster like earthquake and all that. Now, about 1.3 million people in the country today have a temporary protected status. It just allows people to be free from deportation, and they get work authorization while the status is in play. If the administration believes that the conditions under which people were granted temporary protected status no longer apply, it can then seek to terminate it. And that's what it seems to have done about Myanmar today.
Now, would you say this move has any hint of a return to Trump-era restrictionist policies, or is there something more nuanced? And, further ahead, could this decision then have diplomatic repercussions for the United States in Southeast Asia?
Well, I'm glad you just put up the slide that in addition to the Myanmar TPS end today, the leaked memo suggests that the administration may look at the refugee status of all those who were granted their status under Biden. That has never happened in our country before, that once a government allows people to come as refugee status, we respect their decision. And I think it's consistent with the administration's policy that it doesn't believe that people are eligible for refugee status. It has now this year decided to admit only about 7,500 people as refugees. And many of them will go to South African refugees. It says clearly there'll be white refugees. So it's consistent with the policy of this administration that refugee policy should end. And if at all it exists, it should be very narrow. Temporary protected status policies seem to be consistent with that view of the administration, and it doesn't seem to care that much about the foreign policy implications of that decision.
Well, I imagine the other groups or nationalities under TPS now could be feeling a little on edge. Who's next, Mr. Chishti? Somalia? What could this mean then also for America's global reputation?
Yeah, it's El Salvador. Exactly. It's El Salvador, it's Ukraine, it's Ethiopia, it's Somalia, it's Sudan, it's South Sudan, it's Yemen, it's Lebanon. But, we should also note that many of these terminations have also been legally challenged. I would not be surprised if the Myanmar decision is also legally challenged. And our courts have already stopped the termination of the TPS status with respect to Haiti and Venezuela. So the last word on this has not been written. I do think that courts will intervene, at least they will examine whether the basis for termination of Myanmar are really valid. We know that human rights organizations dispute the administration's characterization that there is normalcy in Myanmar. They believe the elections are meant to be not particularly free, and that the real civil war and strife in Myanmar continues. So I suspect we will see a legal challenge.
Okay, back to the Myanmarese who are set to lose their TPS status. What kind of impact will this policy shift have on them currently in the United States? What should they fear losing, and what could potentially happen?
Well, they got 60 days of grace. That means their work authorization and protection from deportation stays intact. Lawyers are advising people that during these 60 days, they can all file for asylum in the United States. If they believe they have a reasonable ground to believe that they will be persecuted upon return to Myanmar, they could file for asylum. And that will then be processed, and that will also mean that their removal to Myanmar would be stopped. That's clearly a strategy, unless the courts also come in the way and provide an injunction against the TPS termination today.
Mr. Chishti, thank you very much for weighing in. Muzaffar Chishti is Senior Fellow at Migration Policy Institute. Thank you.